You're on mute, council member.
That's terrible. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Thursday, March 10th, 2022. This is the Committee on Streets and Services hearing, and I want to welcome everybody to today's hearing. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at any public hearings of City Council, council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, Legal Intelligence, and in Legal Intelligence prior to hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I know that the hour has come. Ms. Golden, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance, will you please indicate that you are present when your name is called? Also, please say a few brief remarks when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen. Madam Clerk.
Vice Chair Squill.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues present.
Councilwoman Bass.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and colleagues in the City of Philadelphia.
Good afternoon.
Councilman O.
Good afternoon, I'm present.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Brooks.
Good afternoon, I'm present.
Good afternoon.
Councilman Johnson. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. And Chairman Thomas.
I'm present, and thank you, everybody. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Streets and Services regarding Bill number 220132. Ms. Golden, will you please read the titles of the bills for today?
220132, resolution authorizing the Committee on Streets and Services to hold hearings regarding Beets, Brine and Salt regarding the recipe for Philadelphia's streets in winter in order to advance our interest in safe roads, healthy streams, and good stewardship of resources and taxpayer funds.
Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have before us today, everyone who's been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments they have for the witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available on Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they would like to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Ms. Golden, will you please call you called the bill already, so will you please call the bill again, and we will begin to hear from our witnesses this afternoon.
We'll only be hearing one resolution, 220132. The first witness we'll hear from is Streets Deputy Commissioner Rich Montanez.
Good afternoon. Please state your name for the record and you may begin with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Thomas and members of the Streets and Services Committee. My name is Richard Montanez, Deputy Commissioner for Transportation for the Department of Streets. Here with me is Steve Lorenz, Chief Highway Engineer for the Department of Streets. I'm here today to present testimony on resolution number 220132 regarding the use of Beets, Brine, and Salt in the winter to treat roadways during snow events. When performing winter operations during an event, there is a balance between clearing the street with salt and being mindful of the environment. It is important to make sure all streets are clear of snow and ice for safe travel. This is not only important for the safety of the users of the road, but also to keep commercial moving in and out of our city. In addition, not only do we use salt in the winter operations, but we also support the Philadelphia Water We also support the Philadelphia Water Department with the water main breaks, SEPTA for troubles locations, Parks and Recs for their trails, and the Fire Department for the icy conditions that are as a result of fires. There are hundreds of different scenarios that a winter storm can bring, ranging from freezing, rain, and ice, up to a 22-inch blizzard that occurred in 2017. Also, Philadelphia is unique in its geography, which presents challenges. The meteorologists always refer to the rain-snow line along the I-95 corridor. One of the reasons it was constructed along the Delaware River was because of the weather conditions being between the ocean and the mountains. There is also a 500-foot difference between the Philadelphia International Airport and the hills of Chestnut Hill. It is possible to have rain in South Philly while snowing up to 6 inches in the far northeast and northwest. Along the Schuylkill River, the temperatures can be lower than the rest of the city due to the river. Salt is the most effective and quickest way to treat roadways, not only within the city, but also across the country. However, there are environmental impacts. Salt is a metal, and when it gets into our streams and rivers, it is difficult to remove. Also, too much salt can be destructive to certain species of vegetation. As a city, we try to be mindful of this and have made efforts over the last 10 years to try to find a balance between treating the streets and protecting the environment. The best progress that we have made is to educate the users of the salt. For years, the philosophy was more salt is better. The city has a capacity to stock over 50,000 tons of salt, but that does not mean that we use it. Other efforts to minimize the salt are we eliminate mostly dry salting. Dry salting is treating the roads prior to the start of a winter event. Salting now begins when the snow starts to fall. Calibrating the augers and spreaders in the back of our truck so that they are not spreading full. On most city streets, a low and medium setting is appropriate. Exploring different types of roadway surfaces that have larger aggregates that will hold the salt and act as anti-skid. Before winter, the Streets Department and the Office of Emergency Management hold separate winter workshops where salt usage is discussed. Topics that are mentioned include the downside if the city runs out of salt, effects of salt as it pertains to the MS4 permit. MS4 is short for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, where the word municipal refers to the unit of a local government responsible for administration of the developed area. How salt affects PWD's effort to treat wastewater. The proper maintenance of vehicles to spread the salt. Increase the use of brine. The administration has invested in our brining efforts by purchasing 2 trailers, replacing the city's flusher trucks, and purchasing 2 trucks that can be retrofit with water tanks that can be used for brine. Brine is an effective, proactive way to get ready for a winter event. Brine is a saltwater mixture that gets applied to the road surface about 48 to 72 hours prior to known winter event. If there is rain in the forecast prior to the snow event, we do not brine. The Streets Department has worked brine into our winter operations plan. We have 2 brine making stations, so we do not need to purchase any ready-made brine. Brine acts as an anti-bonding agent where the snow will start to melt before it bonds to the road. This gives enough time for the salt trucks to appropriately treat the road. We focus on higher level streets and primary roadways with the brine. If there are known special events during a winter event, we will pre-treat those roadways as well. Brine can melt up to 1 inch of snow depending on how fast the snow comes down. The city does not use beet juice in our brining operations. Beet juice is a byproduct of sugar beets. After the beet is refined into a sugar and other agricultural usage, the silage is put into a liquid form. Salt and brine are not as effective when the surface temperature falls below 18 to 20 degrees. Beet juice will allow the brine to work at lower temperatures. It is a rare occurrence when the city falls into low periods of low temperature where beet juice will be needed. When it has in the past, daytime temperatures are in the 20s with the sun. This will activate the salt. We discussed the usage of beet juice years ago and determined that the benefits did not justify the usage. Other reasons we do not pursue the use of beet juice is the beet juice does not have a shelf life where it can be used following the season. The brine stations needed to be retrofit to add beet beet juice into them. PWD will need to review their water treatment operations to see what needs to be added to treat additional biological residue. Whatever beet juice remains on the street after the snow event will start to smell like rotten vegetables until there is precipitation that washes it away. PWD holds and updates the city's MS4 permit with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. The MS4 permit regulates the city's responsibility of hazards going into the rivers and streams. The Streets Department is a partner with PWD for the MS4 permit. The Managing Director's Office created the Clean Water Task Force, in which salt is the topic of conversation. We require all salt to be stored within a covered structure and delivered to be and deliveries to be moved into structures as quickly as possible. Also, efforts are being made to protect yard drainage near the salt structures. In the event salt is stored uncovered, tarps are used. I would like to use this opportunity to thank all of the city's partners who help with providing assistance in keeping the roadways clear of snow and ice. PWD, Fleet Services, the Sanitation Division of the Streets Department, OEM, CLIP, the Philadelphia Housing Authority, Parks and Recs, Police, the Philadelphia Parking Authority, Prisons, and the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. This concludes my testimony, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony. I think what we're going to do is we're going to allow the entire panel to testify, and once the entire panel testifies, we'll open up for questions. So, Madam Clerk, if you can call our next witness for this panel.
The next witness is John from PennDOT.
Good afternoon, John. Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
Good afternoon, council people. My name is John Krafchek. I am currently the Senior Assistant District Executive for Maintenance, for PennDOT Engineering District 6-0. I was asked to speak about our treatment processes and services during winter events. So there are a number of things we do, some very similar to the city, as Rich has talked about. Pre-treating pavements prior to a winter storm, we refer to that as anti-icing, and we do use a salt brine, which we manufacture ourselves, which is basically a water solution with 23% salt suspended in it. Salt brine application rates depend on temperatures. So when we are at 25 degrees or above, we're applying it at roughly 45 gallons per mile. When expected temperatures are 15 to 24 degrees, we're as high as 60 gallons per mile. We apply them similar. We have a few tanker trucks, but mainly we have slide-in units, tanks that equipped with spray bars that we can slide into our truck fleet. Some of the benefits are that our better pavement conditions can be achieved at the onset of the storm, reducing the number of crashes. Bonding, it does prevent or inhibit the bond of snowpack to the roadway. So in the event that you do get snowpack, it would take significantly less chemical to remove that snowpack than had you not brined. Cleanup after the storm oftentimes is easier because of the less ice bonded to the roadway. Applying brine ahead of the storm jump starts the melting process, or the process of improving the conditions. Brine sticks to the roadway surface, is not easily blown off. So the material we use is pretty effective, more effective than putting dry salt on the road, which is often dissipated or blown off the road by vehicles. And it increases efficiency, results in use of less de-icer and manpower, therefore lowering the cost of maintaining. We only apply these brines ahead of snow, sleet, and freezing rain. If the temperatures are warmer and it's starting out as plain rain, we do not apply brine, only because it would just certainly be washed off the roadways. During a storm, our treatments, we put a lot of emphasis on planning So we lay out truck routes and cycle times. The idea of cycle time for a truck is between 2 and 3 hours per cycle, meaning the point at which he starts, when he completes his loop, he gets back to his starting point within the 2 to 3 hour time frame. The reason for this is to give time for the salt to work. Common misunderstanding is salt melts snow. Salt does not melt snow. Salt lowers the freezing point of water. So salt needs to be in a solution for it to work. So applying salt to snow through the action of the traffic, it tends to generate, minute particles of moisture, which then turns into lowering the freezing point of water on the roadway. So ideally, to achieve our cycle times on interstates and expressways, we plan for roughly 20 snow lane miles per truck. On our BPN2, which is one of our higher networks, but not to the interstate level, we're about 25 snow lane miles per truck. Our third business plan network, we're up to 30 miles, and our back roads, rural roads, our snow lane mile is 35 miles per truck. Again, we shoot for times of 2 to 3 hours on cycle times. Salt needs times to work. From the time you put it down until you actually see some benefit can be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Cycling too often, especially when plowing, is a waste of salt. You're just plowing off or adding more salt to the salt that's already in place, which you haven't given time to work. Contrary to belief, more salt isn't better. When you look at the freezing point at which salt lowers the water, it can go down to as low as 16, 17 degrees. However, as you continue to add more salt to that solution, that temperature will slowly rise. So the freezing point of water, by adding too much salt, can go above that up into the 20 degrees. So we spend a lot of time educating our truck drivers on the science of winter and, explain it and demonstrate it to them so they understand. So rock salt with no pre-wetting application rates at 25 degrees or above is 120 pounds per slow lane mile. We do gauge our salt usage based on pavement temperatures. Application rates below 25 degrees, we can go up as high as 210 pounds per slow lane mile. Our systems in our trucks have the ability to calibrate to pounds per mile rather than low, medium, high, so we can be pretty precise with our application. One of the things we've moved to in the past 10 years is pre-wetting our salt with brine, and what that does is it provides the moisture to the salt, and it's sprayed on the salt as it's applied to the roadway. So the salt is already in solution by the time it hits the roadway, so it acts quicker and works better and allows us to use more salt or less salt. Application rates, when we're pre-wetting the salt, can at 25 degrees or above, can reduce our application rate to 100 pounds per snow lane mile. Excuse me, and application rates below 25 can reduce to 170 pounds per mile. So by the use of pre-reading salt, we can reduce our salt usage during a storm by 20 to 30%. So you may think you're still spraying it with a salt brine, but we spray our salt at 6 to 12 gallons per ton, which interprets into 8.3 pounds per gallon. So on average per ton, we're adding 2 pounds of chloride to it. So that's next to nothing. But we're reducing our rock salt usage by 20 to 30%. I'm going to jump right into additives that we can use in the brine. So Rich had mentioned the beet heat, which is desugared beet molasses. There are a number of other products on the market. PennDOT did several years ago work with Temple University conduct studies on four of the alternative products were on the market at the time. Pacific Northwest Snow Fighters did extensive testing in conjunction with Clear Roads. And so not readily understood is because it is an agricultural product doesn't mean it's all natural or safe to our roadways. So the actual desugared beet molasses in its raw form does nothing to melt snow. All these products, when subject to chemical analysis, have chlorides added to them. I believe desugared, the beet heat uses, I believe, sodium and calcium chloride that's added to it to make it effective. Other products can use magnesium chloride, magnesium acetate, potassium acetate, all which are chlorides which can, add to our issues. Our studies, we did pilot some of this in some of our western districts, known as our snow belt, where we get a lot of snow, and they saw no significant difference in using this material over plain salt brine. The only advantage they did recognize is during extremely low temperatures, it did make the salt a little bit more effective. These products are manufactured and expensive and require separate material handling systems and storage systems in in our stockpiles, which we just don't have, when would be a significant boost cost to be able to handle these materials. And again, they cannot be kept from year to year, where salt brine we can. Bagged calcium chloride is right now our preferred method of dealing with lower temperatures, temperatures below 16 degrees. The way we use that, as the trucks come in and load their trucks, we add, depending on the temperature, 1 to 2 bags of bagged calcium to each bucket of salt that goes into the truck. This has proven to be the most effective application for us. We only use it when we get in extreme temperatures. We can store the bags in roofed and enclosed buildings, which gives it a long shelf life. And, this particular winter, we didn't use any. So often winters we'll go by with pallets of this stuff laying there that we don't use. But when we do have a winter storm, that's what we have done. Liquid magnesium chloride we have used in the past. The issue with that is, number one, the cost. It's very expensive. For the amount of times we're dealing with temperatures that low, it's not worth it. Again, these liquid mag would require some sort of storage infrastructure, which we just do not have. Shelf life is questionable. You can't mix it with your normal salt brine without constant agitation, because it does separate very quickly, as does liquid calcium. So that would conclude my testimony, unless there were any specific questions.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll circle back around with questions once this panel concludes. Madam Clerk, can you please call the final member of this panel?
The last witness for this panel is Jana Tidwell.
Good afternoon. Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Councilman Thomas and members of the Streets and Services Committee. My name is Jana Tidwell, and I am the Manager of Public and Government Affairs for AAA MidAtlantic. On behalf of AAA MidAtlantic, I am here to present our concerns about the damaging effects of salt and brine on vehicles. In regions in the U.S. where winter weather is prevalent, de-icers are used before, during, and after storms to make the roadways safe for travel. For many years, transportation departments have used rock salt or liquid de-icers to combat snow and ice on the roads. Unfortunately, these chemicals can also rust and corrode vehicle components. In recent years, many state and local transportation departments have shifted from using rock salt to liquid de-icers to combat ice and snow on roadways. These newer alternatives are more effective than traditional salt because they can be applied before a snowstorm. They have lower freezing point and melt ice and snow faster, as we've heard today. However, these same characteristics can be even more damaging to vehicles, since the chemicals remain in liquid form longer and are more likely to coat components and seep into cracks and crevices where corrosion can accelerate. Beyond cosmetic issues, rust damage can cause serious and dangerous damage to a vehicle's brakes, fuel tank, and exhaust systems. Fortunately, this prevalent issue can be lessened with proper vehicle maintenance. According to a AAA survey that took place from 2012 to 2016, a 5-year period, 7 in 10 U.S. drivers either currently live or in the past 5 years have lived in a winter weather climate region. Half, 51% of U.S. drivers living in winter climates are concerned about the damage that salt and other chemicals used to melt snow and ice on roadways may cause to their vehicle. In the past 5 years, 15% of U.S. drivers living in winter climate regions had to get their vehicle repaired at least once because of rust damage caused by salt and other chemicals used to melt snow and ice on roadways. In total, the cost to repair salt-related rust damage is estimated at $15.4 billion over that 5-year period. And on an annual basis, rust-related damage is estimated to cost U.S. drivers more than $3 billion. Among those who had, those are, again, numbers from a recent AAA study about de-icers and salt damage to vehicles. AAA is always concerned, as are those who have previously testified today, about the road safety, keeping people safe on the roads before, during, and after storms. However, we're also concerned with the damage that these snow and ice melting chemicals and salt can do to vehicles if not properly maintained. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. Before we open it up for questions from members of this committee, I just want to know for the record that Councilmember Gilmore Richardson is present and has joined us this afternoon. I do want to again thank everybody for their testimony. I want to ask my colleagues, members of this committee, if anyone has any questions for this particular panel. I'll start myself. If anyone has any questions, please just indicate in the chat feature that you would like to be recognized. My first question is, listening to a lot of the issues that come from dealing with the salt, not just the pollution as it relates to our local bodies of water, but also thinking about infrastructure issues. I am clearly the chair of Streets and Services, and outside of illegal dumping, one of the things that people reach out to us all the time about is potholes. So can you just take a minute to talk to us about the impact that using the methods that we're currently using has on the number of potholes that we see in the city, and what can we do to essentially address that huge concern, because constituents reach out to us all the time about the pothole issue?
John, you want to touch that one first, or you want me to go first?
All means, Rich, you can go first.
So, Council Member Richard Montanez, Deputy Commissioner of Streets. With me is also Steve Lorenz, who's the Chief Engineer. Potholes are mainly due, yes, water is a factor of potholes, but it has to do with the freeze-thaw cycles that Philadelphia sees. For example, this past Sunday was 70 degrees. A couple days later, we were down in our 20s. So that freeze-thaw cycle within the city kind of moves the earth in a way, creating small cracks on our asphalt, which then lets water penetrate. When water freezes, it kind of, once again, it pops up. So although the brine solutions that we use are laid on top of the asphalt, they contribute to the life of the road, but not to the pothole amount or the amount of potholes. It has to do with the freeze-thaw cycle and how much moisture we have. Steve, John, you guys want to add anything to that?
No, to add to what, again, my council member, my name is Steve Lorenz, Chief Highway Engineer for the Streets Department. Just to add to what the Deputy Commissioner has said, the best way to maintain roadways and eliminate potholes is to have a good paving program. This year, thanks to the efforts of the current administration, we're funded to pave about 70 miles of roadway across the city. In calendar year 2023, hopefully another 70 miles. The streets we picked were some of the worst streets that we have within the city. We start putting a good paving program together. Over time, the number of potholes will reduce. You'll never be able to eliminate potholes. As the Deputy Commissioner also have said, freeze-thaw is part of the main cause of the potholes. We are in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You said, what is the main cause of the potholes?
I'm sorry, council member. It's the freeze-thaw, the cold weather, warm weather, getting inside the cracks of the roadways. Being in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States, we have more of the fluctuating temperatures than in other parts of the country. I'm not saying other parts of the country don't have pothole issues, but the Mid-Atlantic region is more prone to that problem.
So
okay,
I
John,
wonder.
I'm sorry, Councilman. Go ahead.
No. John, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, John Krafchick with PennDOT. So pretty much mimics their things. First, I want to clear up some. There's always, and I hear this a lot from people outside PennDOT, that salt brine is the most destructive thing we've ever used for our roads and for their cars. I want to be very clear on it. Salt brine that we apply ahead of storm is no different than the brine that develops when you place rock salt on snow. It's the exact same thing. There is no difference. As far as potholes, so we both refer to the freeze-thaw cycles. We do go through we're in the belt that goes through the most significant number of freeze-thaw cycles in the winter, and that's the main cause of our potholes. If we were way north and stayed pretty much below freezing all winter, we wouldn't see the issues we see down here. But we get periods of warm weather with rain, and that the water gets into those cracks, quick freeze up overnight, and that ice expands and cracks the pavement. Prevention of that, the best thing is a good repaving program along with a good crack sealing program. If all our cracks were completely sealed, there'd be nowhere for the water to penetrate down into the pavement to cause those potholes.
So if we are dealing with some of the same climate issues that other cities, as far as geographical location, are dealing with, have we talked to other cities about best practices and what they're doing to address this issue? Because I heard someone say in their testimony, we're always going to have a pothole issue. And I can see that. I think that when you look at how big our city is and how active our city is, that on a certain level that problem is going to exist. But it just seems like it's worse than it's ever been before, especially recently. And with us being in a pandemic, one would just think that some of those issues would get addressed. And now that we're coming out the pandemic, we're seeing, hearing, and witnessing the complaints of people saying that it's just as prevalent as it was before. So if it's not the salt that's creating it, and there's other issues such as the I guess you would call it climate change, and the issues with the weather and the inconsistencies with the weather. What are other cities doing, and why can't we replicate some of the things that other cities are doing to put us in a position to really just do a little better?
Well, council member, if I can, Deputy Commissioner, if I may continue to answer with this. Again, this year, or the last couple of years, I'll say it this way, we saw a little bit more freeze-thaw than in previous years. A lot of times, in previous years, where we would get, let's say, the month of January, it would pretty much stay, below that freezing line. Or in the month of February, or if we would get the snow, it would stay. This year and last year, we didn't get as much snow, but we did get more of that fluctuation of freeze-thaw. Okay, so that's why you're seeing more of it over the last couple of years than recently. The other problem that we had is our paving program. Because of funding issues, we were doing the last couple of years 35 miles of paving a year. Last year we actually only did 18 miles, and this is across the city where the streets department is responsible for approximately 2,200 miles of street. Okay. Again, this year and next year, we're going to be increasing our mileage to 70 each year. And then we'll see what happens for the following years out. We'll be dropping back down to 35 miles after calendar year 2023. So calendar year 2024 going forward, right now we're looking at about 30 to 35 miles. The other challenge that we face in increasing our mileage is the current ADA lawsuit that the city is going up against, where the requirements are, as we pave a street, we need to upgrade the handicap ramps. Okay, so right now our budget looks like for handicap ramps, with the price of them, 70% of our budget goes to handicap ramps, 30% goes to the repaving the streets. When comparing Philadelphia to other cities over the years, we have talked to other cities. Again, they're saying the same thing. The best way to do it is a good paving program. We do similar repairs that other cities do. For example, we have our pothole patcher that we lease. We're able to fill a pothole within a minute, and we go around the city with that, and then just manually filling potholes, with a few guys on the crew, and going through and doing the repairs. Now, also, the other problem we have is it's an older city. Not every defect out in the city is a pothole. Okay, you got plumbers' ditches, utility trenches, and there's cave-ins from the older infrastructure. So those are all things that we try to handle at the same time. We have to handle each problem differently. So, Rich, I don't know if there's more you would like to add to that.
Yeah, I just would add a couple more things, Councilmember Richard Montanez, Deputy Commissioner Streets. We're more than happy to meet with your office and discuss. As Commissioner Williams has pointed out, the Streets Department needs to get to 131 miles of annual paving a year to maintain a state of good repair.
What was that number again?
131 miles.
Which is about 100 more than what we're about to do.
Correct, sir.
Okay, just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
So we need to get to that number in order to maintain a state of good repair. At that point, it would put us in a cycle of paving our streets. There is a recommended cycle.
Deputy Commissioner, if we were to do, and again, I'm asking for myself as well as the listener audience and other members of the committee, if we were to do that 135 miles a year that our commissioner is recommending, would we have to commit to the initiatives around building the handicap spaces and having access to that? And you said that yes, 70% of the revenue that we actually spend on street paving goes to the handicap initiative. So it wouldn't just be the 135 miles. It would have to be that number of different handicap accessible sidewalks as well, too. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Go ahead, Deputy Commissioner. I apologize. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's fine. Like I said, we're more than happy to come and have this discussion with your office if you want to see. A couple of years ago, Commissioner Williams put out a report trying to see if we could get to the 131 miles of annual paving. That would also put us into the recommended paving cycles for asphalt. With roads that have a certain ADT, average daily traffic, so they carry truck traffic and all that. For example, and John can chime in, the state roads are somewhere in a 5 to 7 year cycle paving. The city tries to maintain the arterials at somewhere between 7 to 12. And then you will put your, what we call our residential streets, low volume streets, somewhere between a 20 to 30 year paving program.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate it. Just two more questions. So when we look at where we are as far as some of the critiques that we've seen as a city, looking at some of the issues around the ratio of materials that we use to treat roads and how and why we could possibly adjust that, are there any thoughts on any type of adjustment on the type of materials we use in a ratio there?
Well, Deputy Commissioner, if I can start off, is again, Councilmember Steve Lorenz, Chief Highway Engineer for the Streets Department. I think the biggest challenge we have is not so much the ratios of chemical versus salt that we use, is just educating everybody as more salt is not better. Okay, we do use brine. Our percentage is between 22 to 24%. John Crackers from PennDOT testified it's 23%, so we're all in that same amount. We do, try to increase the amount brining we do.
Yeah, and it's your recommendation that this is for environmental purposes. This is the safest way to go about this. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is our opinion on that. Yes, that's our goal. Is to more salt is not always the better. Again, it's harmful for the environment. It's also not healthy for the water department and how they treat the water that's going back into our drinking water. So, again, I've been doing this for 10 years. Overseeing the snow operations for the city, and after most major snow events or icing events, I'll talk to my colleagues over in the water department and ask how did we do with the spreading of the salt? Did we put too much down? Did we put not enough or whatnot? How's it affecting their operation? And they'll come back to me in layman's terms and say, no, we did pretty good, or no, we have to cut back on the salt usage a little bit. Part of when I do talk to the water department, they'll say, and they've got meters and sensors throughout the city where they do see an influx of salt coming in. It's not so much for what the streets department or the city is putting out into the street. It's what's coming upstream from some of the counties when they're going a little bit heavier with the salt. Again, Philadelphia, with the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River, Wissahickon, and the other water channels, we're at the bottom. So, everything up top, feeds into, the water systems and comes down into the city.
Thank you. I'll stop right there. I don't see any questions from any of my colleagues. I'm teed up in a chat feature. So if there aren't any questions from any of the members of this committee, I want to say thank you for your presence here today. I want to say thank you to your service to the city of Philadelphia and all the great work you're doing. I understand that this is a very complex issue. I'm still learning. Oh, I'm sorry. Chair recognizes Councilmember Bass.
My apologies. I just had a quick question in listening to the testimony today, because it's terribly disappointing that we are about 100 miles under where we should be in terms of paving per year. And I'm wondering, are we expecting any federal resources through infrastructure dollars or any other resources that could be used to address some of the street issues that we have? Because it's, as the chairman said, it's really bad. And I know that's not lost on you all. I know that you all are very much aware of that.
Council members, Richard Montanez, Deputy Commissioner of Streets. We are looking at the IIJA to see if there's any opportunities for us to increase our paving funds utilizing federal dollars. There has been a slight increase on federal funds, but they're to cover what we call the FAMs, the Federal Aid Maintenance Highway System within the city of Philadelphia. So you'll see an increase on that. I don't want to speak for John, but PennDOT has also increased their paving that they're planning to do this year. They're going up to 45 miles of state roads within the city of Philadelphia. So you will be seeing an increase whenever possible, and we're hoping we can use some of that federal funds to also do local roads.
Will you be reporting back to the chairman when you have a better idea of what we can expect from the federal side and what the impact would be? So if we are able to do 45 additional miles per year, or 55 or 100, whatever it is where we should be, will you be reporting back to the chairman with that information so we could share it with the committee?
As soon as we find out if there's federal funds for local paving, yes, we could share that.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll add to that. I think when we look at not just federal dollars coming around infrastructure, but also the state has an opportunity to use some of the surplus dollars that they got from the federal government to create initiatives. And I think this is something that we should be advocating for. So as we prepare for budget season, I'm definitely going to be looking forward to our conversation, first and foremost, around increasing the number of roads that's paved and the amount of miles that we do per year from 18 to 35, if I'm understanding folks' testimony today. But also looking forward to hearing how and what we can do to put us in a position to be able to get state and federal resources to help get us closer to a number that's realistic that really address this issue, because this is a crisis that feeds a lot of the other problems that we're facing in the city. And I know that you know that as well too. Are there any other questions from members of this committee for this particular panel? As we close out and as we let you go, what I will say is, again, as we continue to have this conversation throughout budget season, I think that you communicated concerns around using the materials that you use now versus exploring other materials. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with everything that was said, but I do completely understand your perspective and what was communicated today. And I'm hoping that we can continue to explore different options and methods, because I think that you definitely explained the infrastructure issues, and I understand that side of it, but we're still concerned with some of the issues around our water, storming issues, environmental issues, and things of that capacity. So what other filters or what other items can we put in place if this is the method that we're going to continue to use to put us in a position to make sure that we're being as environmental friendly as possible. So I do want to say thank you to everybody in this panel for your testimony today, and also I look forward to working with you so we can continue to brainstorm different options and methods that we can use to make sure that we're being as environmentally friendly as possible. So thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the next panel to testify on this bill?
The first witness for the second panel is Dr. John Jackson.
Thank you. Please state your name. Dr. Jackson, please state your name for the record, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is John Jackson. I am a research ecologist, stream ecologist, aquatic entomologist at the Stroudwater Research Center. I'm a senior research scientist there. And today my testimony is going to be about my perspective of the salt issue, and that perspective has been developed over the last, say, 20 years. I've had the good fortune of sampling over 400 sites in the Delaware River Basin, and included in that are also laboratory bioassays looking at salt toxicity. I've also had the good fortune at some of my sites to have observed the increase in salt as part of our environment. So whereas I recognize there's drinking water issues, there's infrastructure issues, those are not my strength. My strength is really in the environmental area. The second thing, as we get started, it's important that while the conversation is about Philadelphia, as was noted earlier, the water issue in the streams and rivers of Philadelphia are a regional problem. The issue of increased salt in our waterways is not just a southeast Pennsylvania region problem. It really extends from North Dakota all the way down to Virginia, and it's really tied to the use of road salt, primarily, and especially in this area. So overall, salt in our streams has been increasing. We've known about that for about 20 to 30 years. I first observed it in my own data about 2005, somewhere in there. Right now, our concentrations in our streams are anywhere from commonly 10 to 100 times normal or original. So go back to, say, 1940 before we started de-icing. And in some places, we're observing concentrations that are 1,000 or 10,000 times what you would have seen in 1940. And most of this, again, as I said, seems to be tied to road salt use. So it's not a problem, though, that is well regulated, because when the Clean Water Act was passed, the increases were already apparent in the data we had, but we really weren't aware of it. We weren't analyzing for it. But at this point, it's continued to increase. So we're 50 years past passing the Clean Water Act, and we're looking at salt concentrations now that are toxic at some times and at some locations. That's true both in the winter when we see our highest concentrations, but also in the summer. And we see summer salt concentrations still being elevated because every year we're continuing to contaminate the groundwater. Because every winter we'll infiltrate some of that stormwater, some of that snow melt that's contaminated with road salt into the groundwater, and then that comes out as stream water during the summer. As has also been noted, there's lots of people that are responsible. You had two of the parties that are commonly included when say in Wisconsin or Minnesota, they've looked at budgets for salt for a whole watershed. That's the state and municipalities. But private applicators are big players in this conversation. And I would encourage you, this is a challenge for us, but I would encourage you to look at that also as a source. In a budget, they might be 20 to 40% of the total salt going into the waterway. The proportions vary depending on the relative distribution of roads, who's responsible, state, municipal, private roads, parking lots. From my perspective, there's no easy solution. It's a regional problem. Municipalities are going to have to work together. As was noted earlier, whether it's the Wissahickon or the Pennypack or the Tacony Frankfurt, all of these watersheds start outside of Philadelphia and then come into Philadelphia, the city and county of Philadelphia. So that it's really going to be a conversation between people. The other thing is there's really no easy solutions. We have to reduce the salt. If we don't, we're just going to see it increasing. It will continue to increase just as it has for the last 50 to 70 years. And that means the environmental costs, the infrastructure costs, private property damage, drinking water challenges are all also going to increase. So it's going to be just a general decrease in salt use. And when I say salt, I mean all sources, not just rock salt, but brine is just, in my perspective, salt. And the beet juice treatments are, from my perspective, primarily just salt. There are good examples out there. I would encourage you to look for them out of New York, out of Maryland, where significant reductions in salt applications have occurred. But the perspective, of course, it's challenging to interpret their results is where did they start? So we're all part of the problem and we're all part of the solution. The use of salt is something we asked for. Those of us who were around in the 80s and 90s know what those storms did and what people asked for. But we never had a balanced discussion. We didn't recognize the hidden costs. Now we do. We're seeing them. So now we have to revisit that conversation. That concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Madam Clerk, will you please call the next witness for this panel?
The next witness is Jeffrey Selling.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony. Madam Clerk, are we struggling?
Was connected earlier. We can move on and come back to him then.
Sure. Please call the next panelist.
The next witness is Dr. Laura Torin. Dr. Torin, are you connected?
I'm Laura Torin.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a professor at Temple University, and I specialize in urban hydrology. And I want to thank Councilperson Thomas for initiating this hearing on the application of road salts in our city streets. So, as I said, my research area is in urban hydrology, and it involves sampling our local streams. So my field areas are the Wissahickon, the Pennypack, the Tacony, to some extent the Cobbs. Some of these streams I've been sampling for more than 15 years, and I've watched the salt concentration steadily rise. John talked about the 1940s to now time frame, but I'm seeing it creep up over just the most recent years. So we're continuing to add to the problem. Whatever we're doing to mitigate isn't quite working yet. It's a slow creep, so you might not notice if you just compare one year to another, because there's a lot of variability. We know it snows different amounts different years. But if you look over the long term, the trend just is inexorably upward. I get my data from a couple of different sources. We do quarterly sampling with our watershed organizations who've been funded by the William Penn Foundation for the past 8 years, I also reviewed data from the U.S. Geological Survey and the Philadelphia Water Department stream gauges, where they measure stream conductivity continuously. Stream conductivity is directly related to road salt, and it provides some really good long-term data sets. So these data show that the salt concentrations are creeping up from maybe 50 milligrams per liter back in the 70s, 100 milligrams or so a decade ago, and now creeping up to 150, 200. In the Wissahickon and Cobbs, I see locations that are over 200 milligrams per liter on average. Now, this is an annual average, so that means in the winter, the concentrations can rise even larger, as John mentioned. We get peaks over 1,000 milligrams per liter sometimes. And the natural concentrations in an area with no human influence should be more like 10 or 20 milligrams per liter. And road salt's the obvious culprit. Let's look someplace where they don't use road salt very much. Fort Indiantown Gap in central Pennsylvania is a military base. They drive around on Humvees. They don't need to salt their roads, on the base itself. There, when I compare the 1970s to now, it was around 5 or 10 milligrams per liter. It's maybe 10 or 20 now. They're remaining below dangerous levels because they aren't applying road salt. Now, another thing the numbers tell us, as John again mentioned, is that this is all year long. It's not just in the winter. The salt isn't just getting into the groundwater. It's stored in the soil as it travels on its way to the stream, and we don't see enough fresh water clearing out that salt water in the spring and summer. I monitor stormwater basins in the region for that William Penn Foundation grant, and we put sensors in some stormwater basins and found that the salt was there in the winter of last winter, 2021, and it didn't flush out until around June. So the soil in that basin was very permeable. It's not your typical urban soil that drains slowly, and even that wouldn't flush out. These pockets lead to a very large supply of salt in our streams all year long. So John mentioned that there's studies that show that the salt has detrimental impacts on aquatic life in the streams. The EPA recommends that we keep salt below 250 milligrams per liter and peak concentrations less than 840. We've already seen those levels in some of our streams. Another problem is that salt mobilizes trace metals, which can also impair aquatic life. In addition, Philadelphia's Green Streets program is endangered by salt runoff. Stormwater basins work better when they have plants to increase infiltration, but the salt in the stormwater kills many of the plants used in these basins. So this is a widespread problem in our area, around the nation, and around the world, and it's not going to go away on its own. It's just, as I said, inexorably creeping upward. And it isn't easy to predict where you're going to see the problem, so we need to develop a more widespread solution. I think cities can be the people that look for those solutions and then teach the businesses and the public what they can do better. So we can be a real role model if we can figure this out. So I encourage you to keep working on this problem, and I really thank you for discussing the strategies to try to improve the environmental damage that's heading our way. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. I don't see any questions from members of the committee in the chat feature. I'll just ask one, and this is for both members of the panel. Based on your perspective and your expert experience, as well as the testimony that we heard prior to you, clearly there's conflicting interests. What would you recommend to the city of Philadelphia as it relates to how we should move forward? Clearly, they feel like the chemical balance that they're using right now, the ratio of salt and how they're doing things is the best and most environmentally safe way to do it. But on the contrary, we're hearing you as experts testify that what we're doing is not necessarily best. So if you were completely in charge of the work that's being done in the city of Philadelphia as it relates to this particular issue, how would you recommend that we best deal with these storms and prepare for these storms?
I'll take a first cut at it, but I certainly want to hear from John, too. I think John already said that this is a really tough problem to solve. I think communication is one thing that if Philadelphia thinks they're doing the right things, start educating some of the businesses and maybe the suburbs. I see differences in how much salt are in different streams in the suburbs. So some of the suburbs are applying more salt than others. So communication is something that might, more widespread communication about proper ways to do things. Keep your eye. I know there's computers that help you control how much brine you put down. Keeping your eye out on new innovations like that. Maybe even looking at vegetation that might help take up salt, so that on the edges of roads you've got a barrier between the road and when it gets into the soil, and the others. Some plants don't like salt, but there's some that really like it and might take it up. I would just keep your eye on the ball for those new solutions that are coming down, and as soon as you find them, let all of the other communities and the businesses, especially the businesses, know that there's a better way to do things. John, anything to add to that?
No, I really like targeting the private people, and it's the private applicators have the least training, have the equipment that's least easily controlled. And they also have significant liability issues that I've only seen well addressed in other states like New Hampshire, where they have a certification program. And that might be a partnership with the state for our region to help develop something like that. The best example that I've seen, so I think the state and the municipal people are best educated. Probably state first, state and federal types of things. They have the best training and the best equipment, and it's a trickle down. There are some examples, and in my written testimony I included some links. I like what Maryland is doing. They've reduced their road salt use by 50% across a very variable weather, from snowy mountains down to coastal ice areas. And they did it through aggressive brining, and brining is less salt than rock salt, because remember, it's only 23% salt. The other thing is, the guys in New York, they swear by live edge snow blades, or a snow blade that adjusts to a variable or irregular road surface. And if you think about Philadelphia streets, that's the issue that we have. Older streets are not real flat, and the live edge is helpful there. But I think we can learn from others. They're ahead of us right now. What I haven't found out is how to recommend, who to recommend for that training. I just haven't found the links. They seem to be doing it in-house, training themselves.
Thank you. A very, very good insight, very good information. And as we continue to explore this issue, we are hoping that we could tap both of you as a resource to help us think through this complex problem that we're facing right now. So thank you. Thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you for taking time. Are there any other questions from members of this committee for this particular panel? Seeing and hearing none, I want to again say thank you so much for being here with us today and for providing your expert opinion. It's greatly appreciated. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next panel of witnesses to testify on this bill?
The first witness for the next panel is Jeffrey Selling. Jeffrey, are you connected?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
My name is Jeffrey Selling. Good afternoon, Councilman Thomas and members of the Streets and Service Committee. As I say, my name is Jeffrey Selling. I live in the Mount Airy section of Philadelphia, and I'm a retired science teacher from the Germantown Friends School. In my retirement, I volunteer as a master watershed steward with the Penn State Extension, as a stream keeper with the Tacony-Frankford Watershed Partnership, as a weekly volunteer working to improve Rock Creek in Curtis Arboretum just outside of Philadelphia, and finally as a volunteer chloride monitor with the Isaac Walton League's Winter Salt Watch program, which recently named my partner and myself Salt Monitors of the Month. My testimony is based on my roles as a watershed steward, a stream keeper, and a salt watch monitor. Each month, my partner, Chrissa Peterson, and I test the waters in Rock Creek for salt levels. We have done this for several years. Initially, we tested the levels just in the winter, But when they didn't go down last year, we continued to test monthly right through the seasons, only to discover that the chloride levels in Rock Creek were still and are still shockingly high, both in winter and summer. Some of the salt tests we performed actually exceeded the highest levels on our charts and now require us to use different and specialized testing protocols. So much salt is being dumped on the roads, and brine, I might add, and sidewalks and parking lots, that when it rains, all that extra salt goes down into our creeks. We also learned that other salt monitors in the Delaware Valley on other creeks throughout this greater metropolitan Philadelphia area were finding the same thing as we had, that the salt levels were so high that salt was actually getting into our groundwater and keeping the chloride levels high in our creeks year-round. At times, our streams are as salty as the ocean. In the winter, salt levels in creeks we monitor are 50 to 100 times higher than normal, as Dr. Jackson said. In the summer, they're 10 to 30 times higher than a normal, healthy stream. In the watershed through which Rock Creek flows, municipalities are spreading about 220,000 pounds of salt annually, whether in the form of rock salt or brine. Much of it ends up in creeks when the snow and ice melt, and then the rain washes the residue down and off the roads. Salty streams harm wildlife and the riparian plants that cannot survive in chloride-laced water. These elevated levels of chlorides affect things such as fish and amphibians that rely on our creeks, as well as the aquatic insects known as macroinvertebrates that live on the bottoms of our creeks. Macroinvertebrates are juvenile insects that provide food for fish, and when they hatch out as adults are a major source of food for our area bird populations, including our beloved songbirds like robins, warblers, and finches. Salt also is not removed in our city drinking water plants. Since our creeks all end up in the Schuylkill and Delaware rivers, and those rivers supply our drinking water, something that many Philadelphians don't understand, this means that our citizens are drinking and using water high in chlorides, which is a major factor in high blood pressure and in heart disease. Elevated chloride levels can affect people who have health concerns related to salt intake. Additionally, as has been mentioned, salt is corrosive to pipes, faucets, sinks, and appliances in both businesses and homes, causing enormous damage that takes place slowly and insidiously. Roads, bridges, cars are all affected by this heavy salting, and we all pay for the repairs. Most all of our creeks in this area are impaired, some seriously. Salt is one of our major impairments. We've talked a little about where this salt is coming from, but I want to review because there's a few things I wish to add. Obviously, there are the major highways and the major roadways that are salted or brined by PennDOT. I won't say more about that. It's been covered. The city and suburban streets are salted by our streets department or by the various townships and street departments in the counties. Often there is very sloppy application. In my written testimony, which I will be submitting, are photographs of huge salt spills in Philadelphia, one taken right on the Ben Franklin Parkway, and in my own neighborhood of Mount Airy. So please do look at the testimony, the written testimony, and you'll see those actual photographs. There's also a problem of over-application. Salt is often over-applied on the mistaken assumption that a road with a thick, crunchy application of salt will somehow be safer than a street with less salt. There are standards from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for correct amounts of salt, and more importantly, there are actual trainings for salt applicators. So I am including the link for that in my testimony, in the written testimony, because that might be something that our PennDOT and our Streets Department could look into, those online trainings. A third problem, as Dr. Jackson mentioned, are parking lots of retail establishments, especially those big box store complexes and shopping centers. These establishments are often on rented property managed by absent landlords who simply pay salt applicators to put on lots of salt. Again, many people mistakenly equate lots of crunchy salt as making those parking lots safer, but it doesn't. Again, refer to the trainings for applicators from Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. A small amount of salt can go a long way, and crunchy parking lots are not safer. I recently watched a salt truck in one of the suburban parking lots. As it came to each lane's end, it stopped because there were cars going by, but the application machine kept going. So at the end of each lane were enormous piles of salt as it went up and down each supermarket lane. Then there are the homeowners. Homeowners often apply salt on snow instead of shoveling, and they overlap salt on sidewalks. The average Philadelphia homeowner can make their icy sidewalk safe with just one coffee mug full of salt rather than quarts and quarts of it. Moreover, few homeowners clean up extra salt debris after the storms. There needs to be a widespread education program. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the burgeoning perception among many Philadelphians and suburbanites that heavy snow, our roads ought to be almost instantly passable with our vehicles going at normal speeds. If our streets aren't instantly plowed and heavily salted, many citizens grumble that the streets department is incompetent and our tax dollars are being wasted. A citywide education program is needed to help our citizens understand the impact of that perception and how the increasing pressure on city and is harming our streams, our wildlife, our health, and our infrastructure. So thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I invite you all to look at the photographs in my written testimony because I think they're quite compelling. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and for the detailed information is very much appreciated, including the links. So we appreciate it and we will definitely check it out. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next witness for this particular panel?
The next witness is Dr. Jerry Klein.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jerry Klein. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a veterinarian. I'm here also the Chief Veterinary Officer for the American Kennel Club. But prior to that, I was an emergency veterinarian for 35 years, culminating in department head of the emergency department. So 35 years of Chicago means 35 years of Chicago winters. So many emergencies. Our specialty in emergency center saw about 11,000 patients per year. But I also am a dog owner and living in Chicago in the city. So I experience individually what's going on with my dogs, but also take care of other dogs as well. And to be truthful, as an emergency, there's medical issues and there are medical emergencies. And I think de-icers can cause one or the other, depending on why. And all de-icers are comprised of salts, sodium chloride, potassium chloride, magnesium chloride, and calcium chloride often, or calcium carbonate. And they all can be dangerous if they're ingested, but the majority of dogs don't ingest these in any large amounts. They usually do it incidentally because they lick their paws after being walked in these in sidewalks oftentimes. And urban dogs are usually walked either on sidewalks or alleys, and of course they may have to cross the street as well. So the most common problem that I found with our dogs are usually not medical emergencies, but medical issues, even my own dogs, is contact irritation from the salt on the pads of their feet, usually manifesting in red paws. They may become lame or lift their paws up. It's usually rectified by rinsing the paws up when you get home or wiping things off clear or having dogs wear booties, which used to be almost non-existent, but now many people in the city are using it. Also for the weather seems to be getting colder. But the number of dogs actually getting gastrointestinal issues and toxicities is much less. Every dog is individualized, more so than people, because of the great range in size, from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane. So the amount ingested is dependent upon the dog's size. So if a Shih Tzu or Chihuahua is walked and ingests a certain amount off their paws, they may vomit or have vomiting and diarrhea. Oftentimes resolving on its own, but sometimes requiring medical help to rectify the gastrointestinal upset. However, there are the rare occurrences where a dog will get into a bag of salt, and that will cause much more serious issues. To be truthful, in my 35 years, I've had less than a handful of dogs that have done that. I think all of them Labradors, because they seem to, salt is not palatable to most dogs, but some dogs do. So I think in the city, it's very dependent upon you may do certain things for your own home, but your next door neighbor or 3 doors down may do something very differently. So an individual dog is subject to different types of de-icer material in any one walk, and how it affects the dog can be very individualized. But I think the good news is to be truly toxic to a dog, they would have to eat a huge amount of de-icer proportion to their body weight to become truly ill. That doesn't mean that things can't be done to be better, but I think that's my experience with that here in Chicago. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. It's appreciated. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next witness for this panel?
The next witness is Stephanie Wine.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Wine, and I'm the Clean Water and Conservation Advocate for Penn Environment. And in my capacity at Penn Environment, I work on our programs to ensure that Pennsylvanians have access to clean water from stream to tap. And so thank you for inviting our testimony. So Penn Environment and the members we represent throughout the city of Philadelphia have a vested interest in healthy streams in our city. And we simply can't have healthy streams at the level of salt we already use. So we support improvements to street salting operations that allow us to reduce the salt on our streets, sidewalks, and parking lots. The salt that we apply to our roads during winter storm events washes into our storm drains and off our roads into the city's creeks and rivers, as I think we've well established. And while the Streets Department has been more mindful of salt overuse in recent years, salt levels, as Jeff shared, in our urban waterways following winter storms can exceed the salinity of the ocean. And the plants and animals that live in our city streams, from the Pennypack to the Wissahickon to the Schuylkill River, they're adapted for fresh water. And so when pulses of salt flood our waterways, the results for our city's aquatic wildlife are disastrous. And even when salt concentrations aren't immediately lethal, the increased salinity we're seeing has long-term impacts on aquatic life. So for amphibians, it disrupts the development of their eggs into tadpoles, and it depresses their immune response to pathogens, leaving populations of our frogs and salamanders more vulnerable to the numerous novel diseases that are already threatening amphibian populations. And even brief pulses of highly elevated salt levels can have irreversible impacts on the growth and development of eggs and tadpoles. And similar impacts have also been observed in the growth and development of fish eggs and of larvae. And salt also decreases the number of insects in our streams, which compromises the base of the food webs in our urban forests, like the Wissahickon, feeding the animals we love to see, like songbirds. And so, as the experts before me have shared, the salt also lingers, not just right after the winter storm events, but it lingers in the ground and it releases into the streams in the spring and summer months. And that provides an unhealthy high salt condition year round, which is an ongoing stressor for our aquatic wildlife who don't get a break from that high salt environment. And the impacts, though, for the wildlife go beyond the streams themselves. When salt washes off roads into ditches, into front yards, into gardens, into parks, it increases the salinity of the soil nearby. That limits what plants grow. And so with more salt, we see less plant diversity at our curbsides, which is a particular shame when Philadelphia is working to lead on green infrastructure through our Green Cities Clean Water program. A lot of that relies on healthy plant communities right alongside our roadways. And the plants that are able to grow will actually concentrate increased sodium in their leaves. So the same plant will have more salt, and that can cause salt toxicity for the animals that eat those plants. And so, for example, the monarch butterfly, which depends on the milkweed plants that many environmentally minded Philadelphians are faithfully planting in their gardens, they can experience higher mortality when they consume too much salt from eating higher salt milkweed. And then what we do on our city streets obviously does ultimately end up in the Delaware River, which we and other municipalities rely on for drinking water, as has been said. There we see the oversalting impact on human health. And so over the last 3 decades, increased road salt in American rivers has impacted drinking water. The USGS has found an increasing number of public drinking water with salt concentrations above the EPA safe threshold, which is, of course, poses a health risk to people with heart conditions or blood pressure that are trying to control their salt intake. But beyond that, the increased chloride from the road salt also increases corrosion in our pipes. And as a city with as many lead pipes as Philadelphia has, this can lead to increased lead leaching into the drinking water. We need to be doing all that we can to limit the risk of lead leaching into Philadelphia's pipes, and that includes protecting our source water, which includes addressing road salt. And Philadelphia, we are uniquely blessed amongst major cities with our urban green space and with our beloved streams like the Wissahickon and the Pukising and the Tukini. But to keep our natural spaces and ourselves healthy, I'm just encouraging a rethinking of our approach to road salt. And as noted by other experts, there are a lot of solutions. First, when we care about safety, which we get by increasing traction, and there's ways to do that without de-icing. So earlier and frequent plowing and the use of the best blade technology can decrease the need for salt. And sand and other mineral spreads can create traction and reduce slipping on our roads and sidewalks and parking lots. But I think the most important takeaway from us as an environmental group is just the need for less salt. As many have said, more is not better. Northeastern cities are developing salt application to maximize efficiency, and we should look to their leadership. And this, of course, includes, as has been said, brine application, and that can include additives that increase efficacy. While beet juice has been shown to reduce the amount of necessary salt and increase the efficacy at those lowest of temperatures, these solutions are still highly saline, and a lot of additional additives like calcium chloride, they aren't without their own environmental impact. And so when we decide to use brine, we still need to be mindful of overuse, and we shouldn't think of that as something that is somehow different from salt. For beet juice, the pulse of organic material and of nutrients into our waterways that comes from beet runoff can cause algal blooms. That reduces oxygen available in our waterways and then can make our streams inhospitable for fish and insects. And then magnesium and calcium chlorides might reduce the impact of how much sodium is ending up in the water, but these salts still contain chlorides. That can have that same impact of lowering the pH and have the aforementioned impact of corrosivity and lead leaching in our drinking water supply. And while this may be beyond the scope of this hearing, as some of the other testifiers have noted, how much salt is applied by private property owners, I challenge the city to find a way to address this holistically. And we also need to work collaboratively with our upstream neighbors in the collar counties to reduce their own salt, because as we work to get our salt house in order, we're still a downstream community. And so we need to make sure that we're working with our neighbors to make sure there's less salt in our streets and therefore less in our waterways. Thanks for the opportunity to testify, and Penn Environment's happy to be a resource to council on the impact of oversalting on Philadelphia's environment.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do. I think that a couple things really stuck with me. I think you gave us some phenomenal information and facts. I think my heart kind of went out to the pets, just thinking about all the different animals across the city. Philly is like one of those cities that has unique DNA, and I think we're a pet city. People really love their pets in Philadelphia, and to know that this is something that continues to damage animals and pets in the city outside of those who are in the water is something that's alarming. But then also just considering and thinking about what we're doing as a city and the impact that the decisions that businesses make and how they decide to preserve land and spaces in their area when a storm hits is a significant problem as well. I would love to move into a space in a place where we're relying on more street pavement when these storms hit, but we know far too often that the city is not capable of paving all the streets across the city, and far too often poor communities and communities of color are the ones who get left out, and they end up stuck on their block and dealing with ice and snow for days at a time after a really bad storm. So I think that we have a lot of work to do. This panel was really good. You guys gave us some great information and a lot of things that we really have to think about and contemplate as we figure out what direction we go in as a city, as well as how we provide information to not just our businesses, but also our private partners. So thank you to this panel. Are there any members of council who have any questions for this particular panel? Madam Clerk, are there any other members of this panel to testify?
Yes, we have two more witnesses to testify.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was a little excited. If we could go ahead and let our next two witnesses testify, that would definitely greatly be appreciated.
Absolutely. The next witness is Samantha Briggs.
Please state your name for the record and you may begin with your testimony.
Hi there. Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. My name is Samantha Briggs, and I'm the Clean Water Program Director at the Isaac Walton League. The Isaac Walton League of America is a national member-based organization. We're a conservation organization with a mission to conserve, restore, and promote the sustainable use and enjoyment of our natural resources, including soil, air, woods, waters, and wildlife. The League has a long-standing history of advocating for clean water, most notably with our Save Our Streams program, created over 50 years ago. Over the past half-century, Save Our Streams has evolved to meet the challenges of modern water quality problems such as road salt pollution. In 2018, after a large salt spill outside of League headquarters in Maryland left Muddy Branch Stream with toxic levels of salt runoff, League staff launched Salt Watch, a crowdsourced monitoring program that equips volunteers with free test strips to sample the waterways in their community for road salt or chloride pollution. The Salt Watch data from each collection site is loaded into a national database, which is available to researchers, the public, and policymakers. The Isaac Walton League hopes that robust data collection over successive years will help establish a reliable baseline information and pinpoint pollution problems so local authorities can address road salt problems and adopt better practices. Last winter, volunteers from the Philadelphia metro region submitted over 275 test results. 44% of the results submitted from September to May yielded high readings, over 100 parts per million chloride, and over half of those high readings were at toxic levels, over 230 parts per million. There were more than 3 times as many results in the 2020 to 2021 winter season as the previous year around Philadelphia. With more volunteers than ever keeping an eye on road salt pollution, there is more data to confirm that salt is a significant water pollution issue that can harm aquatic life and drinking water for years after the salt hits the road. Ideally, freshwater lakes and streams should have low to no salt content. Levels above 100 parts per million exceed naturally occurring concentrations of salt. According to the EPA, concentrations above 230 parts per million are toxic to aquatic life with prolonged exposure. Excess salt in drinking water can be a problem for people with high blood pressure and other health conditions that require a low-sodium diet, since water filtration plants are not equipped to filter out excess salt. Even more alarming is the fact that excess salt is corrosive to infrastructure, which can leach lead and other heavy metals from pipes that can result in a public health crisis similar to the Flint water crisis. While road salt can improve driving safety during icy conditions, the salt eventually washes into watersheds where it damages the quality of drinking water and harms aquatic life in freshwater streams and lakes. More than 100 million Americans depend on local streams for drinking water, but the water treatment plants are not equipped to filter out excess salt. The Isaac Walton League created Winter Salt Watch to give volunteers the tools to identify excess road salt in streams and other waterways. The program aims to ensure transportation safety while protecting clean water through best practices, including, number 1, tailoring salt application strategies to the weather and the product being used. For example, certain road salts such as sodium chloride are only effective at ambient temperatures over 20 degrees. At lower temperatures, this product does not protect drivers and only exacerbates water pollution when the weather gets warmer. Number 2, calibrating salt spreaders on salt trucks and using road temperature sensors. Calibrated salt spreaders and brining allow for better understanding of how salt is being applied. Greater use of temperature sensors can dramatically reduce excess applications before predicted storms. If road temperatures are above freezing, pretreatment might not be needed, or the amount of salt applied could be dramatically reduced. Number 3, training and certification for snowplow drivers and contractors who maintain walkways, parking lots, and service roads on private property. Testing by Saltwatch volunteers and the experience of state and local governments demonstrate that excessive salt application is common among private contractors, but simple training can quickly improve their practices. And number 4, educating the public about how road salt works and what it is an appropriate amount to apply on their own property. For example, one 12-ounce mug is enough rock salt for a 20-foot driveway or 10 sidewalk squares. Threats from road salt do not end in the spring. Warm weather coupled with reduced stream flow during the summer months means chloride levels will be even more concentrated, putting stress on wildlife and drinking water treatment plants. It is vital to decrease road salt application in the winter months to conserve resources, protect wildlife, and maintain safe drinking water for generations to come, all while still maintaining public safety. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next witness for this panel?
The last witness for this panel is Denver Preston.
Please state your name for the record and you may begin with your testimony. Mr. Preston, we seen you briefly, but if you're talking, you're on mute.
How's that?
Great. Good afternoon. Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
Okay, my name is Denver Preston. I'm with K-Tech Specialty Coatings in Ashley, Indiana, and we're in the de-icer business. We manufacture a de-icer called Beet Heat. I want to start out by thanking Councilmember Thomas and the other council members for calling this hearing to consider alternative de-icing materials. And I also want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my testimony. I've been in this field for 12 years. I've seen many agencies achieve amazing reductions in chloride emissions, and for some, the reduction was achieved very, very easily. So I've been told that you have the handout that I provided, Mr. Thomas. Yes. Okay, yes. So the title here is the Boost and Reduce method. So I'm going to tell you right here and now, the information that I'm going to go over today is super, super easy to understand, okay? Very, very easy to understand. And it starts out with page 1, what I call simple logic. And that simple logic is the better your rock salt or chloride performs, the less of it you need to maintain the same exact level of service. Now, if you will turn with me to page 2, what we have here is we have ice melt capacity results. We hired an independent laboratory to do these ice melt capacity tests for us as we were developing our product. And so over on the left-hand side here, I want to show you this is how much ice untreated rock salt melted in a 60-minute time period at 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so untreated rock salt. To the right of it, we have brine-treated rock salt. Okay, now you can see right there that the additional ice melt capacity was less than 1% more than the untreated rock salt. And the primary reason for this is brine on rock salt is nothing more than sodium chloride on sodium chloride. Okay, if you take grape juice and you mix it with grape juice, you have grape juice, just a little bit more of it. So by wetting your rock salt with brine, this is the performance benefit that you get out of this. In the middle here, we have 32% calcium chloride, and you can see that by putting it on your rock salt at 7 gallons a ton, the performance of that rock salt goes up almost 20%. Now, then we have beet juice. This is a product called GeoMelt 55, and if you put it on your rock salt at 5 gallons a ton, look how much better your salt performs. 27.3% more ice melt in 1 hour than brine-treated rock salt, which is what you guys are using right at this moment. And then to the right of the GeoMelt 55 is our product. We call this blend Beet Heat Severe, and it's a 50-50 blend of our Beet Heat concentrate and your sodium chloride brine. If you mix these two de-icers together and apply them to your rock salt at 10 gallons per ton, look at the performance boost here, okay? 64% more ice melted in the 60 minutes than brine-treated rock salt. Now, why do we talk about performance here? It goes back to my original statement. The better your rock salt works, the less of it you need to maintain exactly the same service levels. So if you turn with me to page 3, again, talking about this boost and reduce method, here is simple mathematical logic. If salt B melts 64% more ice than salt A, then salt B can melt the same amount of ice as salt A with 39% less rock salt. or in our discussion today, 39% less chloride emissions into your environment. Okay? Are you with me?
We are. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that as the chair, but we are.
Okay. All right. So page 4 here is a visual. So the only thing that I'm trying to show here is
let me do this too, since I already interrupted you once. For those who are listening to the hearing, Mr. Preston submitted a documented testimony, and so as he's going through the pages, he's going through a document that he's already submitted to members of the Streets Committee that basically outlines his testimony. So I just wanted to put that out there for those in the listening audience that may be listening. Go ahead, Mr. Preston. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. So on page 4 here, we just have a visual. And the little pile of salt there that's colored, that would represent the organic treated rock salt. And that pile is 39% less than the brine treated rock salt that is right there. So 39% less chloride by simply adding a liquid de-icer to your rock salt, okay? Now, you might also see right below where it says 39% less chloride, it also says return on investment over 267%, okay? Now, let's talk about the cost to use these products. Earlier testimony, and I have a quote in here I will touch on in just a little bit, but earlier testimony mentioned that these, organic de-icers or, manufactured de-icers are significantly more costly. This is something that it's hard to understand why people can't grasp this simple mathematical logic on this. Yes, the organic de-icer is more money than the brine, but when you look at the cost savings of reducing your salt application rate by 39%, that argument of being significantly more costly is nonsense, pure nonsense. So on page 5, I inquired as to how much rock salt the city of Philadelphia uses, and the 10-year average is 34,700 tons, or 34,700 tons of chloride. Now, if you reduced your chloride application rate by 39%, that means the city would reduce its salt consumption by 13,561 tons, or another sort of visual here, 542 semi-loads of rock salt. Now, if you put those semis nose to tail, I did the calculation the other day, and that line of semis hauling rock salt would be about 24 miles long if you put them from nose to tail. So what we're talking about here is reducing your chloride emissions by 13,500 tons and 542 semi-loads of chloride. All right? Now, page 6 gets a little bit more into the numbers. If you just look there in the top blue line that says enter data here, this is what we call a salt savings calculator. You might as well call it a chloride savings calculator. And I've got the 34.7 in there. Tons that you use on average. I have $64 a ton. I'm assuming that your brine that you're making in-house is costing about 20 cents per gallon. That's most DOTs across the United States peg that cost at about 20 cents a gallon. I have it calculated that you're putting it on at 7 gallons a ton. Now, the next blue line there, line number 5, has $1.18 in it, and that would be the cost of our product once you purchase our product and mix it 50-50 with your brine. So $1.18 a gallon. Yeah, that is significantly more money than your 20 cents a gallon for your brine. But when you add performance into the equation, we go down to the yellow section down here, we see 64% better performance, means you can back your application rate down 39%. That would equate to the 542 semi-loads of rock salt, and your net savings would be somewhere in the ballpark of $667,000, okay, or a return on investment of 267%. The next line below that, let's go to the red boxes if you want to take a look at that. The last box says 41.63%. What that line represents is the amount of money that you are actually spending more than what you need to spend. If you continue on with your brine on rock salt, maintenance methods, you're going to be spending about 41% more money than necessary. And all you've got to do is make the transition to the much better performing product that you're putting on that rock salt, which would be very easy for you guys to do. So then page number 7 here, what does this 267% return on investment really look like in layman's terms? That means for every $1 that you spend on this better performing liquid de-icer, you're going to save $2.67. So invest $1, save $2.67, okay? Page 8, beet heat and the environment. And let me just say that I've listened to all of the testimonies today, and I'm 100% on board with your environmental experts. Yes, chloride is a huge problem. I deal with an organization in Chicago called the Conservation Foundation. I sponsor workshops that they put on to lower chloride emissions. I think their work is amazing. And lo and behold, we have about 40 agencies in the Chicagoland area that are using our product to lower their chloride emissions. But let me touch on, I have 4 things here. Number 1, our product, as I've already pointed out, can give you the ability to reduce your chloride emissions up to 39%. Our product is ready biodegradable in 9 days. It is 99% biodegradable in 28 days, and the biological oxygen demand, or BOD, is 0 at 39 degrees Fahrenheit. 0, all right? And I'm going to add a 5th one that I did not put in the presentation because I heard in some of the other testimonials talking about corrosion. Our product, our beet heat concentrate that you would be mixing with your brine, is 86% less corrosive than salt. 86% less corrosive. And when you mix our product with your brine, it's then 75% less corrosive than rock salt or brine, okay? So 5 things there from an environmental standpoint that you really, really need to consider. It's like I said earlier, this is very, very easy to understand. Now on page 9, this is the quote that I talked about a little bit earlier, and I took the time to read some newspaper articles in the Philadelphia region before preparing for my testimony today. And one quote I have here is from the Pennsylvania DOT. It was in the Philadelphia Inquirer on January 11th of 2022, and it says, and I quote, "Materials such as manufacturing and agricultural byproducts, manufactured de-icing composites, and treated salt have proven effective at low temperatures, but cost significantly more than rock salt. Okay, I've already touched on this. This is an argument that cannot stand on its own. Yes, it's expensive in comparison with brine, but when you consider the performance benefits, brine is one of the least cost-effective de-icers anyone could ever use. The least cost-effective. I don't have that argument in my presentation today, but I'd surely like to meet you someday or have another meeting where we could go over some of these other things that I don't have time today. Now on this last page, this is a map. And this map right here, just so everybody can see it. All right. This map is all of these little push pins are where our customers are at. And so here is Pennsylvania, right there, and here's the rest of the world. The rest of the world is right here, okay? When my advice to you from this point forward is you need to talk to people, agencies, cities, DOTs that are using these products. They can very easily convince you that they're going to tell you you must use these products. It's a no-brainer. And you should guard yourself against listening to people that are 10 years behind the technology. So with that, I'll end my presentation, but I'd love to take some questions from you and some of your other council members.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I am going to open it up to my colleagues if there are any members of this committee who has any questions for this particular panel or this particular set of witnesses. We had about 5 different people on this particular panel. I'm talking about a number of issues and discussing options for the city of Philadelphia. What I will say to everyone on the panel and to everyone that's a part of the conversation, this is just a first step for us in the city of Philadelphia. This is the first time that we've had a conversation like this in recent history, especially post-pandemic. We need to be as efficient and as effective as a city, thinking about how we could best serve the citizens of Philadelphia and making sure that we're being as environmentally friendly as possible. And so I think that we've gotten a lot of recommendations here today. Before we move on, I just want to see if there is anybody who would like, anybody who's present, whether it's members of the committee or witnesses that's here today, that would like to add anything to the conversation that has not yet been added. Are there any questions, comments from members of the committee as well as any of our members of this panel? Anybody would like to add anything to the conversation today? There being none, I want to thank everybody on this panel for your testimony today. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for your insight, for your information, your expertise, your willingness to partner with the city of Philadelphia, and your availability to continue to be a resource to us as we move into budget season and determine how much money we're going to spend on these different areas and how those dollars will be allocated. So please make sure that you continue to work with us and put us in a position to make sure that we're making the decisions that are in the best interest of the city of Philadelphia. So there being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify here today, I will ask, as I did multiple times, if there's anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call that wishes to offer testimony on any of the bills being considered today. There being none, I want to thank everybody on the panel and all the witnesses for their participation today. We appreciate your presence, and this concludes our hearing on the Streets and Services Committee. Thank you, Madam Clerk, and your entire team. Your work is greatly appreciated, and thank you for everybody, the members of the committee and the expert witnesses who were involved in this conversation, as well as the folks behind the scenes who made this happen. This was a great dialogue. There was a lot of information, and we have work to do. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.